someone have you ever cared?
Hello again. I'm Dr. Hung Vu, and our show is America's Healthcare Crisis. Tonight, we will discuss the second part of medical ethics. In the first part, my guest speakers, Dr. Young and Dr. Wheat, gave us a general introduction into the field of medical ethics as we view it today. During the second half of our show, our production, we're going to try to find out whether we can put some of those principles into practice. Dr. Young, during the last part of discussion, we began to mention that the ethicist should be the director or the conductor, sort of coordinating the work of other specialists. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that subject?
Well, I was saying in the previous segment that that's an ideal, often and almost invariably contradicted in the real world. When the Clinton administration belatedly invited 30 bioethicists into the discussions that preceded the Clinton healthcare reform proposal, these 30 people were expressly told not to consider the subject of rationing. Rationing was to be off the agenda entirely, for obvious political reasons.
Right,
the American people don't want to hear of rationing, and therefore politicians don't want to introduce that word.
Right.
Now, from a logical standpoint, if we're going to hold down healthcare expenditures, and if we're going to include everybody, that is, even the 39 million not presently included directly, plus the additional 20 or so million who are underinsured or uninsurable, if we're going to include everybody and hold down expenditures, everybody is not going to be able to have everything they want.
So
we're going to have to set some limits, right?
Sure.
It's logical. And yet these people were told rationing is off the agenda. Now this to me is a very interesting cultural phenomenon. Just briefly, a quick historical excursus. When the national healthcare system was introduced in Britain in 1948 by the Labour government, it was in the context of rationing. Britain had had rationing throughout the years of World War II. People had to line up for food, for fuel, for clothing, for housing. And the National Health Service promised them more than they had. So that from day one, the National Health Service imposed limits which were acceptable to the British people. We have come through what I call the expansionist decades of the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, whereby we got more and more and more. People became accustomed to more and more and more in every area of life. And to now think of cutting back and saying you cannot have it all is practically unthinkable. And that's part of our dilemma. How to get people back on a track where they look at the common good rather than what benefits them as individuals.
You remind me of an Oriental teaching which says that he who knows he has enough, he who feels he has enough is rich. You see, because for a long time we drove monsters of cars that consume large amount of gasoline, and we thought that the more the better. And then we realized that it's better to have an economical car running on less fuel. So really, it's an attitude, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a philosophical state of mind.
Yes.
I mean, you can spend 100% of the GNP, and still it's not enough. All people want is
it's a great concept, and it's something I think that everybody would philosophically agree to, that we need to provide for everyone and we need to control costs. The problem gets down into what about me if I want something, or my wife or my kids or grandmother and so forth, and then I want everything done possible for that person. Changing that cultural feeling, which is developed over a long period of time and is really part of the American culture dating way back, The English system that grew out of World War II was actually a development of the old panel system, which had been there since World War I, and the society was used to the concept before the National Health Plan came into place. So it built on a past. This country has never had a concept of rationing in place. In times past, it had to do with dollars and the depression you didn't have and you didn't go, or if you went to the doctor, you took some eggs or something and paid for your care. But as we became more technologically advanced, at the same time society was in this huge upsurge in economy post-World War II. People and a whole generation adopted the concept that if it was there, I want it, and if I am actually entitled to that if I desire it.
Yeah.
So that to change that, to reverse that culture is going to be very difficult. I think it's happening now. Our industry nationally is in a downsizing mode. We're changing the whole concept. People are having takeaways in their health benefits. They're miserable about it. They're feeling badly about it. They're having takeaways in a variety of things and benefits. And there are fewer jobs in many industries. The same thing is happening in healthcare. We became an enormously expensive luxury in many ways, and the payers, the people who have to pay the ticket, have said we no longer can afford that. And so they're clamping down through their insurance plans. And healthcare is going through a dramatic national scene, particularly here on the West Coast, where things usually start. And we are downsizing all of our hospitals. We're running hospitals, we have 50% of our beds are unfilled, and yet we still have all the charges. We're having to get rid of that. So perhaps with time, through other means, not because it's ethically correct, but because it's economically, it has to, we will begin to change some of these views. And when it begins to hit people in the pocketbook that we can't do everything for everybody, then they will begin to accept the fact that there may be a need for rationing. We ration now. We've always rationed. In this country, we ration economically by denying service to those who can't pay. And in other countries, you ration because of cost, and you do it on the basis of age or longer queuing to get to the doctor or to have an operation. That's rationing in a different way. But I think it will happen here, but I think it's going to take a generation for people to relearn some of these basic tenets of economy, which have to do with, you know, you just got so many dollars to do it.
Free lunch. Now, Oregon's experiment, I think, was important because not only did Oregon attempt to set priorities for its publicly funded programs on the basis of outcome analysis, which is very important. We've not done enough of that. On the basis of the predicted difference it would make in terms of quality of life, but thirdly, on the basis of what the preferences of the people of Oregon themselves were. And that's the democratic vision. And it may be that if we could enlist the people of America in a project whereby they help set the priorities and decide what is basic, what is extravagant, what is luxury, what is optional, what is necessary, we've got a better shot at it. The other thing I wanted just to say in response to what Dr. Wheat was saying is that so long as costs are hidden from the consumer, as long as I think I can have whatever I want as long as someone else is paying for it, that kind of behavior is encouraged.
Irresponsible.
And it's irresponsible. As soon as at least a fraction of the cost comes home to me personally, I'm going to become much more attentive to what I say I want and what I think I really need.
That principle is called accountability.
Accountability.
That is happening as companies and health plans, because of the high cost, to enlist the aid of the individual by putting in co-payments where they begin to see the cost difference. It's being fought vigorously by all of the organized groups that are involved, but it is coming into place, and it's coming in everywhere. as one way to reduce the cost of health care. And it's very important. I agree with you. That brings it home.
The thought I have is that basically America is a very dynamic society. It always searches for better solutions. It torments itself, but it's a healthy thing. And the second thing is that we are a very open system. And there's no, I mean, way in the world that when I was growing up in Vietnam as a teenager would think that someday I would be hosting a show like this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
This is a very useful, high quality production, and I'm doing it. So, I mean, we have ways to get around, and I'm optimistic about the outcome of our future. And it is very important for us to have this kind of productions instead of all the, you know, not so positive things that are going around us. And I'm very grateful for you to be here, you know, for this kind of discussion.
One area which I think is most bothersome to me is the codification of this right. The laws that are being written, the judicial opinions which are being placed on the record, which are very difficult to change, that have to do with the rights of individuals to have what they want, or the rights of the individual to be maintained on life even if they are essentially dead in a vegetative state, whether infants or others. The right of the individual to say, you must keep that child that has no brain alive because that's what I want. And the courts are saying that that's correct. The individual has the right to do that, which goes against everything we're saying about allowing the greater good to allow beneficence to take place. That's, I think, very disturbing to me.
But you know, that also presents, I think, a major challenge to medical professionals.
It does.
Because if medical professionals more rigorously could define the standards of appropriate care for people in various categories, the anencephalic baby, the adult in a persistent vegetative state, then the individual physician who wants to say, no, this is not appropriate, would have more solid backing, and I think the courts would perhaps begin to pay more respect.
That's true.
But at the moment, you know, you take persistent vegetative state. We don't have any nationally defined medical consensus about what is appropriate in terms of treating such a person. Is hemodialysis 3 times a week appropriate for this person in persistent vegetative state? Is ventilatory support for the next 10, 12 months appropriate? We don't have any agreement. And I think the ball really comes back to the medical professionals to define much more rigorously what is deemed appropriate. And I think that the courts might then begin to follow.
You mentioned the Oregon experiment that's taking place and how that came about. And that was a fascinating procedure where they went to the community. They went to every little town in Oregon. Problem is that Oregon's total population is the same as San Jose and San Francisco combined, whereas the United States has a few million more folks. And to reach into the boondocks, into the basis of the country, and have town hall discussions and reach consensus about what's appropriate, what isn't appropriate, and how dollars should be spent is a very daunting
It's a huge
project.
job. But you know, with the information superhighway and interactive TV, it's possible. Within 25 years we may have interactive TV.
And also we should not forget that, you know, individual rights cannot even survive without certain collective good.
Absolutely.
You have to live with other people too, and it's not like Robinson Crusoe anymore, you know. And also you see the, let's talk about that issue a little bit. You use the word appropriate. In a more fancy term, people talk about quality medical care. What is the basic quality medical care, and whether it is a right or a privilege?
Well, firstly, I would say that there's been a huge amount of confusion about this word quality medical care. And in the various proposals that ultimately fizzled out, quality seemed to be equated with quantity. So when the politicians said, we will maintain the quality of healthcare services, what they were really saying is you're going to keep getting whatever you've become accustomed to. And I
Right.
think that was a very misleading and potentially damaging statement.
Yes.
Because quality is not the same as quantity. And we've used the word care in our discussion, and care is not the same as treatment. And, you know, a small semantic but a very important point is that some treatments may ultimately be futile, but care is never futile.
Exactly.
Care should never stop.
Yes.
There are different ways of caring. You can care aggressively, or you can care palliatively, you can care through the hospice kind of but caring should never stop. And this notion that care is futile, I think, is damaging. But your question, just go back to it, because I've lost my train of thought. How
Is that a right or a privilege?
is medical care a right or a privilege? I would argue that access to basic preventive and services and treatment for treatable and reversible problems is a right for all people in a decent society.
Okay.
I do not believe that that right should extend to the kinds of desires and wants that we've been talking about, which fall more into the category of enhancement or improvement, perhaps, than reversible problems.
Sure.
I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
I think there's some interesting ethical issues that are coming before us all around, which aren't medical by name, but are medical in context. For example, gun control.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate to have everybody out there with a pistol? Is it appropriate to have assault weapons?
Yeah.
More
$20
than just
billion a year in California spent on picking up the pieces.
That's right.
Yeah.
In Baltimore, 10 years ago, it was 1,200,000 per handgun injury. I mean, those are all borne by the public.
Absolutely.
And so there are major
Again,
issues.
think morality, think higher good.
Yeah.
I mean, you can talk about gun, you can talk
Smoking.
about whatever, but you think first about what is the higher good. That is the first thought that I'd like to invite people to have. See? And you mentioned prevention there, because I mean primary care. I have been in primary care all my life. And I really feel that 90% of the medical problems I've seen in my practice are potentially preventable.
Yes.
Are there going to be any incentive to promote prevention and health instead of treating diseases?
Yes, there is now. And this is where economics converge with ethics. Take the institution from which I've come. We now have a new mobile mommy van, okay, which is going out into the community and offering prenatal care and pediatric vaccinations, etc., to people who have not come to the hospital.
Right.
So we've learned the lesson. We've got to be out there where they are. It's taken us a long time to learn that lesson, to our shame. I was in India 2 years ago in an area comparable in size to San Mateo County. 98% of the children had been vaccinated. Our rate in San Mateo County is 68%. And this is a much more affluent society than India.
I want to just throw in one somewhat reverse statement. Prevention is a great thing, and I'm a total believer in preventive care. On the other hand, preventive care does not save dollars in the long run. There is no long-term saving. People are vaccinated now. They don't get measles and mumps. They don't have some of the long-term debility or cardiac elements. But in the long run, people age with prevention. They get through some of these childhood things, and the terminal costs at the end of life are higher. So that there are some interesting
Ironies.
issues that you can bring up about this.
Of course, none of us knows when the last 6 months or
That's
year
correct.
of life is. So it's hard to figure out.
That's the, enters the notion of quality of life. See, because to me, like for example, I think that one of the things that I thought I have is that in cardiovascular practice, is that something that the surgeons would do nowadays after the bypass operation? Do they go on and encourage people to behave better, eat better, exercise and all that automatically? Or they just wait for the patient to come back 2 years later for another bypass?
I think it's a great effort is being put on it. And the reason is economic.
Yeah.
As more people belong to HMOs, where there is a set fee per individual, the greater the risk it is to the providers, the doctors and hospitals, to have people have to have that second procedure. It's going to run them right out of business. So getting preventive care in both after surgery or preventing it in the first place by getting people to reduce their cholesterol, stop smoking and exercise, all of those good things, has a very strong economic motivating force in the new world of medicine. So I think we'll see changes that way.
Let's spend the last portion of our program talking about the quality of life here. You mentioned earlier that by preventing people from getting sick, they live longer, and maybe that would be more costly. How should we live as we age, and when should we quit?
How should we live as we age, and when should we quit?
And die?
This is a very personal decision. I mean, one can speak in the abstract and say that optimally one should live to the maximum of one's potential and capacity, no matter what age one is, recognizing that those potentials and capacities will vary developmentally. It doesn't work out like that in practice. I mean, none of us is perhaps living to the maximum of our potential or our capacity. So how should we live as we age? I mean, I think the emphasis on exercise and diet and healthful lifestyles is making an enormous difference in terms of improving the quality of life of people who are aging. Not all, but certainly a significant minority, especially in better educated areas such as the Bay Area.
You know, I'm a Buddhist, and you know, I believe in, you know, of course, reincarnation, and I feel that if I have lived a good life, that when the time comes, I just lay down and quit. You know, I mean, to me, I have come to terms with that. It's again, it's a cultural or, you know, religious background I have. I don't have any problem struggling with that at all.
The experts in gerontology now feel that the species life limit is about 120 years. That we should be, if all things went well and everything was perfect, that we could live to 120. We could live well to that age, theoretically. In matter of fact, that's a far cry from reality for most people. The current statistics have men at 72 or 4 and women at 78 or 79 or 80. But many of the people who live into their 90s or live to be 100 are not having any quality of life. And we are warehousing those poor souls in institutions across the country. So some ways your Buddhist feeling is much more accurate. Many of us who aren't Buddhists have the same philosophy that you live well while you can, and then hopefully, like the one-horse shay, you fall apart with a bang, and that's that at that point.
Yeah, that's a fascinating kind of subject because, again, you know, we believe in, of course, cause and effect. You know, we can live a very happy life and die a peaceful death, depending on what you have achieved in previous life and this life and so forth and so on. So if you are a rotten apple, you may not die well, that kind of thing, you know. To me, it makes perfect sense because, you know, it makes me feel very at peace with myself. But again, I'm not preaching Buddhism or anything. I'm just sharing some of the
Well, if you wanted to get some ethical questions into this particular discussion, you could talk about the question of euthanasia. Or at what point does a person have a right to say, I've lived a good life, I have done well, I'm now failing, and I see myself on the downward slope, and it's time to leave the party before it's over.
Okay.
And that's
one quick question before we stop here because we're running out of time. Two names come into mind: Timothy Quills and Kevorkian. What are your thoughts about
those two names? The immediate reaction I have to those two names is that Timothy Quill had at least an 8-year relationship with the patient he purported to help, patient with an acute myelogenous leukemia, for whom he prescribed barbiturates so that she could end her life when the pain was no longer tolerable. And he did that in the context of a very long-standing relationship. Kevorkian has had extremely short-term relationships with 20 people, each of whom he's sped on to higher things. I put those into quite different categories.
Okay.
Quite different categories.
Okay.
Yes, I don't think there's any question in most people's minds about the two. Timothy Quill was a caring physician who spent a great deal of time, discussed this with the patient, knew her, followed her illness, and recognized where it was going, and gave her the privilege of making the final decision to spare her family the final cause. That's very different from pulling the plug on somebody you met 20 minutes before.
Yeah. That's the important distinction, isn't it? Anyway, we're running out of time. Gentlemen, I really appreciate you being here. It's very enlightening for me. I learn a lot, and I hope that our viewers who watch this show will have something to think about, and I think that's the purpose of this show anyway, is to help people understand certain issues, and even very obscure, apparently obscure issues like ethical can be presented and understood in a very clear fashion. So again, I'm Dr. Hung Vu. Our show is America's Healthcare Crisis. The topic of the discussion for our program tonight has been medical ethics and its applications in medical practice. Thank you for watching. Till next time, good night.
Well, Oregon's going to be voting on it.
Someone, have you ever cared? Do you miss someone? Have you ever shared? Do you need someone to always be there when you feel lonesome and deep in despair? Do you need someone to dry up your tears? Do you need someone to always be near? Do you have someone to stay through the years? Let me be the one, now that I am here. Let me be the one to be there with you.